Here is what everyone gets wrong about why people don't invest. The assumption is always that it comes down to not knowing enough. That if we just gave people better financial education, more YouTube videos, more books, they would finally take action. And that might be true for some people. But for a huge number of people, probably including you, since you clicked on this video, the problem is the exact opposite. You know enough, maybe you know too much, and all that knowledge has quietly turned into a wall between you and actually doing anything. You know enough to see every possible way you could get it wrong, enough to feel like you are already far behind to catch up, enough to convince yourself that waiting just a little longer is the careful, smart, responsible choice, when really every month you wait is compounding in the wrong direction. By the end of this video, you're gonna understand the exact reason your brain keeps choosing delay over action. And you will have a clear, specific, manageable way forward that does not require you to become a completely different person first. Coming up in this video, we are going to answer 3 questions that I think have been quietly eating at you for a while. Why does knowing exactly what to do make it harder to start, not easier? Whether I just need to do more research phase is genuinely helpful, or just a more sophisticated way for giving up. And what kind of person lets fear silently cost them years of compounding growth? All 3 answers are coming up right now. Here's something I want you to think about for a second. You own a cookbook, maybe 2 or 3 of them. You have read them. You actually enjoy reading them. You have dogged the pages. You have watched the YouTube videos that go with the recipes. You genuinely want to cook more meals at home. But most nights, you order takeout anyway. Not because you don't know how to cook, not because you lack the recipes or the knowledge, but because something about actually starting, the prep, the cleanup, the nagging feeling that it might not turn out right, feels harder than it should. So you close the cookbook, you open the app, and you tell yourself you will cook tomorrow. Investing is the exact same problem. And I know that because I have been there. There was a point in my life where I had read enough about index funds to hold a conversation with a financial advisor. I knew what a Roth IRA was. I understood compound interest. I could explain expense ratios to someone at a dinner party. I had done the research multiple times, and I still hadn't invested a single dollar. Every time I got close, something stopped me. Maybe the market felt uncertain. Maybe I told myself I needed to understand one more thing before I pulled the trigger. Maybe some quiet part of me just didn't feel ready yet. I could not fully explain it. I just kept waiting. And what I have come to understand after talking to a lot of people about this is that waiting had nothing to do with what I knew. It had everything to do with what I believed about myself. Because here's the truth that most financial content completely misses. Most people who understand investing but aren't doing it have made an unconscious decision, built up slowly over years of feeling behind. Years of thinking investing was for people with more money or more certainty or more of something they didn't have. That investing is just not for someone like them. Not yet. Anyway. And that word yet is doing more damage than they realize. Because it makes the whole thing feel responsible. It sounds like patience. It sounds like caution. But what it actually is a story. A story about who you are and who you are not. And as long as the story stays in place, no amount of YouTube videos or financial education is going to move you. This isn't a discipline problem. It's a perception problem. And that's actually really good news, because perception is something you can change. Your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. So if it's not laziness and it's not ignorance, what is actually happening? Because that's the question that nobody seems to want to answer directly. Everyone wants to tell you what to do. Open an account, pick an index fund, start small. And sure, that advice isn't wrong. But it completely skips over the part where your brain is actively working against you and has been for a while now. Here's what's actually going on underneath the surface. Your brain is wired to treat uncertainty as danger, not metaphorical danger, real, physical danger. The same way it would respond to a threat in your environment. Psychologists call this ambiguity aversion. It's the well-documented tendency people have to prefer a known bad outcome over an unknown one. And it shows up in investing in a very specific way. This is why someone will leave money sitting in a savings account earning 1% interest, knowing intellectually that it's barely keeping up with inflation, rather than moving it into an index fund where the long-term data is overwhelmingly in their favor. The savings account is known. The index fund is unknown. And to your brain, unknown and dangerous feel like the same thing, even when the numbers say otherwise. And then layer on the top of that something called loss aversion. This comes from Nobel Prize-winning research by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. What they found is that the pain of losing money is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. Twice as powerful. So if you gain $100, that feels good, but if you lose $100, that feels roughly twice as bad as the gain felt good. Now think about what happens when you sit down to make your first investment. Your brain isn't running a calm cost-benefit analysis. It's scanning for everything that could go wrong. It's imagining the loss. It's treating the uncertainty of the market like a genuine threat to your survival. And then it's presenting you with a very compelling case for why waiting. Just a little longer. Just until things are clearer. Is this careful, responsible, intelligent choice? And here's what makes this so hard to push back against. Your brain isn't wrong to do this. This response kept humans alive for thousands of years. When the danger was predator, hesitating before you acted was smart. Caution saved lives. The problem is that your brain is running the same ancient software in a completely different environment. One where the real risk isn't acting too soon, it's waiting too long. I remember the first time I actually tried to make an investment. I had the platform open. I had the fund picked out. My cursor was sitting on the confirm button. And I just froze. My heart was actually beating faster over an index fund. It felt genuinely ridiculous in the moment, but the feeling was completely real. My body was treating that confirmation screen like it was something I needed to be afraid of. And that's the moment that I started to understand that it wasn't a knowledge problem, because I knew exactly what it was doing and why. The fear wasn't coming from ignorance. It was coming from somewhere much older and much deeper than that. So if you have ever gotten close to investing and then quietly talked yourself out of it, you are not broken. You are not weak. You are not bad with money. You are a human being with a brain that is doing exactly what it was built to do. The frustrating part is just that it was built for a world that no longer exists. Now that you know your brain isn't broken, here is the specific pattern that's playing out. Because there's one particular way this wiring shows up in smart, informed people that makes it even harder to recognize and even harder to escape. And it has a name, the research loop, when learning becomes hiding. You just learned that your brain avoids uncertainty by default. So here's the obvious next question. What does a smart person's brain do when it needs to avoid something but it still wants to feel good about itself? It finds the most socially acceptable way to stay stuck. And for smart, informed people, that way is research. Think about how this plays out. You decide you're going to finally figure out this investing thing. You watch a few videos, you read some articles, you learn about index funds, expense ratios, tax advantaged accounts, and it feels genuinely productive because it's productive at first. You're filling in real gaps. You're getting less confused. This phase was real value. But then something shifts. You finish one video and the algorithm serves you another. You learn about Roth IRAs and then you find an article comparing Roth IRAs to traditional IRAs. And suddenly you're not sure which one is right for you. You look into index funds and then someone mentions that not all index funds are the same. And now you are going down a rabbit hole about expense ratios and fund overlap. Every answer generates two new questions. Every decision point opens three more doors. And here's the thing, you never stop. Because stopping would mean deciding. And deciding means you could be wrong. This is what psychologists call analysis paralysis. But I want you to reframe how you think about it. Because it's not really a productivity problem. It's not a focus problem. It's not even a discipline problem. It's an anxiety management strategy. A really effective one. The research loop feels responsible. It feels like exactly what a careful, thoughtful person should be doing before making a financial decision. It gives you something to show for your time. It lets you tell yourself and anyone who asks that you're working on it, you are being careful. You're not rushing into anything. And all of that feels genuinely virtuous. That's precisely what makes it so effective at keeping you stuck. Because here's what the research actually shows about information and decision making. Psychologist Barry Schwartz spent years studying what happens to people when they have too many options and too much information. What he found, laid out in his book, The Paradox of Choice, is that beyond a certain point, more options and more information don't improve the quality of your decision. They make it worse. More information produces more second guessing. More options produce more regret. And more of both produces more avoidance. There is a point at which additional research stops reducing your risk and starts increasing your anxiety. The most people who have been in the research loop for months or years crossed that point a long time ago. I did this with a specific fund once. I spent weeks comparing two funds that were, looking back, almost functionally identical. Same underlying index, expense ratios that differed by something like 0.02%. I made separate shares. I did forum threads. I watched comparison videos. And then I found one comment in one thread that raised a question I hadn't considered yet. and I started the whole process over. I never bought either fund that round. Something new always came up to research. And here's what I want you to really hear, because this part matters. You didn't fail at taking action, you succeeded managing anxiety. Your brain found a solution to the discomfort of uncertainty that felt completely reasonable, completely intelligent, and completely safe. The only problem is that it came at an enormous cost. And that cost is something most people never actually sit down and calculate. Because we talked about compound interest all the time as this powerful, almost magical force. But compounding works in both directions. And the longer you stay in the research loop, the harder it's working against you. The real price tag on waiting. You have heard the phrase before. Time in the market beats timing in the market. It gets repeated so often that it starts to sound like a bumper sticker. Something you nod at and move on from without really letting it land. So let's make it land. Because do you actually know what your specific delay has cost you in real numbers? Not abstract numbers, not some hypothetical person in a textbook. You, the months or years you have spent in the research loop, feeling like you were getting closer while the clock was running in the background. Let me give you a tool that makes this concrete. It's called the rule of 72. And it's one of those things that sounds complicated until you hear it once. And then you never forget it. Here is how it works. You take the number 72 and divide it by your expected annual return. The result tells you roughly how many years it takes for your money to double at a 7% average market return, which is a conservative, widely used estimate for long-term stock market growth. Your money doubles approximately every 10 years. Now let's put some real numbers on this. Let's say you're 25 years old and you invest $10,000 today. By the time you're 35, that $10,000 has become $20,000. By 45, it's $40,000. By 55, it's $80,000. You didn't add another cent. You just left it alone and let time do the work. Now say you wait 10 years. You are 35 when you finally start. Same $10,000, same 7% return. By the time you're 55, you have $40,000 instead of $80,000. The gap isn't $10,000, the gap is $40,000 from one decade of waiting. And here's what makes that number hit even harder. The person who waited didn't do anything dramatically different. They were not reckless, they were not irresponsible. They were just still researching, still waiting for the right moment, still telling themselves they would start when things felt more certain. And that completely reasonable, completely understandable delay quietly cost them $40,000. Now I want to be clear about something, because this is the part where financial content usually tips into shame. And that's not what this is. The point of those numbers isn't to make you feel terrible about the past. You can't go back. The past months or years are already gone, and there's absolutely nothing useful about drowning in guilt over them. The point is to make the future feel urgent, because the next 10 years are still ahead of you. And what you do in the next few weeks, maybe even the next few days, determines whether you're the person with 80,000 or the person with 40,000 at the end of them. But here's what I also want you to notice, because this is something that almost never gets talked about. The cost of waiting isn't only financially. Every month you spend in the research loop is also a month of compounding a story about yourself. A story that says you're someone who almost invests, someone who knows about it but does not quite do, someone who is still getting ready. And the longer that story runs, the more evidence your brain collects to support it. The more natural it starts to feel, the more your identity quietly shifts toward being someone who waits. The financial cost is real and it's dramatic, but the identity cost is what actually keeps people stuck for decades. Because money you have not made yet is abstract, but who you believe yourself to be feels completely, unmovably solid. So the cost is real on both sides of it. And now you're probably thinking, okay, I get it. I need to start. But here's the thing, you have thought that before, maybe several times, and something has still stopped you. So let's talk about what that something actually is. The identity ceiling. Why knowing better isn't enough. You have known you should invest for a while now, maybe a long while. And if knowing were enough, you would have started already. So why hasn't it been enough? This is the question that cuts right to the heart of it. Because you have watched the videos, you have done the reading, you have had the moments of genuine motivation where you told yourself this timing was going to be different. And then something stopped you again. And the frustrating part is that you cannot always even explain what that something was. It wasn't one clear reason. It was just resistance. A quiet, persistent, almost invisible force that kept pulling you back from the edge of action. Here's what that force actually is. Behavior follows identity. This is one of the most well-supported ideas in behavioral psychology. And it's at the core of James Clear's work in Atomic Habits. The basic idea is this: lasting change does not come from setting outcome based goals. It does not come from telling yourself you want to have $100,000 invest by the time you're 40. Goals like that feel motivating for about a week and then fade. Lasting change comes from identity based shifts, from changing the story you tell yourself about who you are. Because here's the thing: you don't just have habits, you have a self concept, a picture of yourself that your brain is constantly, automatically working to stay consistent with. And if that self concept does not include being someone who invests, if somewhere deep down you carry the belief that investing is for people who are more sorted, more stable, more certain than you currently are, then every time you get close to taking action, your brain is going to find a reason to pull back. Not because you're weak, because you're consistent. Because your brain is doing exactly what brains do, which is behave in a ways that match the story it already believes about you. And that story didn't come from nowhere. It was built slowly. Maybe you grew up in the household where money was always tight and investing felt like something other families did. Maybe you have spent years feeling behind financially and the shame of that made it easier to avoid the topic entirely. Maybe every time you tried to engage with investing content you ended up feel more confused and more overwhelmed, and your brain filed that away as evidence that this just isn't your thing. None of those experiences made you broken, but they did leave a mark. And that mark is a quiet, unconscious belief that sounds something like this: investing is not for someone like me. Not yet. The word yet is doing enormous damage. Because it sounds humble, it sounds reasonable, it sounds like you're just being careful, waiting until you're truly ready. But yet it's a moving target. Yet means when I have more money. Yet means when the market settles down. Yet means when I finally understand everything well enough to feel certain. And certain never comes. So yet becomes never, disguised as patience. Here's the shift that actually changes things. You don't think your way into a new identity. You act your way in. This is the part that feels almost too simple when you first hear it, but it's backed by decades of research of behavior change. Every small action you take that's consistent with a new identity is what psychologists call a vote for that identity. A single vote does not win an election, but enough votes cast consistently over time rewrites the story. This means that investing $25 into an index fund isn't really about $25. It's about what that action says about who you are. It's a vote for a new self concept, one that says, I'm not someone who invests, not someone who is going to invest, not because who almost invests, someone who does. And once that story starts to shift, everything that comes after it gets easier. Once you understand this, the fix becomes a lot simpler than you would expect, because you don't need more information. You need one small action that proves a different story, one minimum viable investment. How to finally break the loop. You now understand the psychology. You know what your brain has been doing and why. You know what that delay has actually cost you. You know that this is an identity issue, not an information issue. So what's the actual move? Because here's where a lot of financial content lets you down. It spends all this time explaining the program and then gives you a vague advice like just start or take the first step. And you're left thinking, okay, but what does that actually look like? What do I really do today to break out of this loop? That's what this is. A specific 4-step framework designed not to optimize your returns, but to break the pattern. Because at this stage, breaking the pattern is the only thing that matters. Step 1. Pick one account, not the best one account. A huge part of what keeps the research loop going is the belief that your first decision needs to be the right decision. That if you pick the wrong platform or the wrong account type, you're going to regret it, fall behind, or somehow damage your financial future in a way that's hard to undo. And that belief is what sends you back into another round of comparison articles or forum threads. Here is the truth. A Roth IRA at Fidelity is not meaningfully different from one at Vanguard or Schwab for someone who is just starting out. These are all reputable. These all are reputable, established platforms. The differences between them at your stage are so small they are genuinely not worth the weeks of research people spend on them. The best account is not the one with a slightly better interface or the marginally longer history. The best account is the one you actually opens. Pick one and move on. Step 2. Pick one fund, not the best fund, one fund. This is the part where I'm going to make it even simpler than you think it needs to be. A broad market index fund, something that tracks the S&P 500 or the total stock market, is what the overwhelming majority of professional investors recommend for most people who are starting out. This is not a compromise. This is not settling for less because you do not know enough yet. This is genuinely, legitimately the strategy. The research on this is not ambiguous. The answer already exists. You do not need to keep looking for it. Pick a total market index fund with a low expense ratio and stop there. The research is done. Step 3. Invest an amount that feels almost too small. Now, what you think you should invest? Not the amount that would actually make a dent. An amount so small that if you lost every single cent of it tomorrow, your life would not change. $25, $50, $100, the size does not matter here at all. What matters is the action. Because remember what we talked about in the last section. The first investment isn't primarily a financial move. It's a psychological one. It's a vote for a new identity. It's the moment you stop being someone who is going to invest and become someone who invests. Everything compounds from that moment forward. The money, yes. But more importantly, the story you tell yourself about who you are. Step 4. Automate the next move. Once you have made that first investment, set up a recurring automated transfer, even a small one. $10 a week, $25 a month. The specific amount matters much less than the fact that it's automatic. Because willpower is a depleting resource. Every time you have to make an active decision to invest, you're drawing from a tank that runs out. Systems do not run out. Once the automation is in place, inertia stops working against you and starts working for you. Now I want to come to the question we opened this video with. Why does knowing exactly what to do make it harder to start, not easier? Because knowledge without action creates a gap between who you believe yourself to be and how you're actually behaving. And the wider that gap gets, the more uncomfortable it becomes. The more uncomfortable it becomes, the more your brain wants to avoid anything that reminds you it exists, including the topic of investing itself. This is called cognitive dissonance. And it's why the more you know and the longer you wait, the harder starting actually feels. The fix was never more knowledge. The fix is one small action that closes the gap. So take it today, not when the market looks better, not when you have more money, not when you feel ready. Because ready is not a feeling that arrives on its own. Ready is what you become by starting before you feel it. You're no longer someone thinking about investing. You're someone who invests. And look, taking the first step is huge, genuinely. But here's what I want you to know. Starting is only half the battle. The other half is building a system that makes sure you actually stick with it. Because willpower alone was never going to be enough. And that's not a flaw. That's just how human works. I made a whole video on exactly that, why you can't stick to a financial plan, and why discipline has nothing to do with it. It's the natural next step from everything we just talked about, and I think it's going to hit just as hard. It's right there. I will see you there.